Thank you so much. 1963, work had been underway for months, maybe even years, to make a statement to the world of the condition of race in the United States. The gathering was in Washington with Dr. Martin Luther King, the primary speaker. And he shared at that time his I Have a Dream speech. And I want, we talk about it, and there's a lot of hustle and bustle about his holiday. But I have to admit I had not read his sermon until this week. But I want to share a bit of it with you because it's worth repeating again. 50 years ago, a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, from the Lincoln Memorial, signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree is a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still badly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives in a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come here to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all, yes all, black and white, as well as white, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of liberty, life, and the pursuit of happiness. We must, however, conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protest to degenerate into physical violence. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust all whites. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by the presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied to our destiny. And he went on, but he finally concluded with this. I have a dream today. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. Of thee I sing, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's shrine. From every mountainside let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Jersey, New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightened Alleghanies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the mountain-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the cavernous slopes of California. But not only that. Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain, Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain, Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every mountain hill and molehill in Mississippi. From every mountainside let freedom ring. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all God's children, black and white, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands in singing the words that old Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. The title of my message this morning is A Personal Perspective on Dr. King. In May of 1954, the Supreme Court under Warren, and probably the most liberal court of our era, handed down Brown versus Board of Education. In that decision, it said that segregation violated the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. The 14th Amendment was crafted in 1866 by the Reconstruction Congress to make amends for the, to write part of, to put something in the bank for the black population by giving them citizenship. And also, see, Dred Scott had said they weren't citizens. Well, the first words of the 14th Amendment clarified that. And then we went on to say, nothing will abridge rights of any American, no matter what their race, former status, that everybody was free to practice their lives under protection of law. Well, within 20 years, the South found ways to avoid that and went on to set up Jim Crow after about 30 years of pretty good early Reconstruction. It's interesting to read that history, those first from 1865 to about 1885. There were black and tan governments, they called it. There were blacks and whites in the South who came together to govern the states. My home state, Tennessee, South Carolina, the most racist, hateful state back for secession, had a pretty representative assembly. But it wasn't long that before the Supreme Court, in cohorts with the southern white population, voided all those gains. And we went back nearly 3 steps backward rather than 2. And it would take to the 1950s, to 1960s, to wake up America to the condition of Americans. It took 2 world wars, and they sent their sons, and they died along with the whites. It took all that participation could make possible as far as our culture, the black contributions. Heck, the White House was built by slave labor. The recognition of white contribution, of black contribution to our way of life needed and still needs recognition. So in the fall of 1954, Doak Mansfield went to Camargo School. Daddy took me and our 2 neighbors, Bobby and Mildred, and me, and I could see that morning just as clear as it is today, of us sitting in the pickup truck waiting for school to start. And I was going at 5 years old, and I would continue in that school, and I would go on to the schools of Lincoln County, and by the time I was a sophomore in high school, 1964, integration took place. So it took Tennessee 10 years. And it took some of the other southern states much, much longer just to integrate. Well, there's an interesting thing about integration. Now, all those years later, there's a new segregation in the South. There's a new segregation in the South. Laurel, Mississippi, where my wife's place was and where we lived off and on for the last 30 years, their high school, 94% black. It's a private school out in the county where the whites go. Now that's duplicated all over. It's even duplicated in my home county, in Tennessee, which is a little less arbitrary in their racism. But there is and all of them are pretty well guised as Christian academies rather than segregated white supremacy high school. There's none named that, but that's what it really boils down to. Dr. King was born in 1929. He could have nearly been a classmate of my mom's. She was born in 26. He graduated from high school at 15. He went on to Morehouse College in Atlanta. He was a prestigious mind. But he grew in a good garden. His daddy was totally a pioneer in black rights all his life. It's an interesting thing. While Daddy, Papa King, was a minister in Birmingham. He was sent by his congregation to go to Germany to a gathering of Baptist ministers to celebrate Martin Luther. When Daddy came home, he changed his name. And he changed his boy's name, who was a junior. Martin Luther King was born Michael King. And in honor of Martin Luther, the original Protestant Reformation leader, the King's boys got that name. Well, Dr. King went on to Northern Seminary, Koser over in Pennsylvania, and then would get a PhD from Boston University. And for a black man in the 1950s to get a doctorate, PhD, not a doctor of ministry, PhD, from Boston University was no small treat. So Dr. King wasn't a Bible-thumping preacher. He never was. But he took to his task. He got married, made a family, moved into a couple of congregations, and ended up the leader in Montgomery. And I'm not sure any of this was not sort of charted by the stars. I think all the alignment came in the time of we got to do something. And Dr. King was a little man. He was meek. He did not like to engage in confrontation. When he was around white men, it was said that he was very deferential. You can imagine LBJ talking to him. It had to be an ordeal, because LBJ was never gentle about anything. And Dr. King was giving him a hard time. Personal perspective on Dr. Martin Luther King by Doak Mansfield. 3 of my mentors in my life was a Jew, a black man, and 2 Christians. Those are my 4 teachers. The Jew was the Jewish merchant in my hometown, Joe Sir, who saw me, blessed me, and encouraged me, probably more than anyone else did around me. The family scene was pretty well Doak. Well, that's Doak. And I was a loner and charted my own course pretty quick. And then Roy Morrison was my black professor at Wesley Theological Seminary back in the early 70s, and he taught me I could think. And there were 2 Methodist ministers, one Methodist minister, Ben Alfred, who worked with me at the little college I worked with and helped me chart my course to become a minister. And then Will Campbell, who was the teacher, preacher. He called himself a bootleg Baptist preacher. And he said, we're all sons of bitches, but God still loves us. So he was a rough and tumble type. Well, he was the only white guy that was at Dr. King's place when they organized the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And he would spend the next 30, 40 years trying to make the South wake up to its racism and do a better job of it. Remarkable fellow. Look him up. He's written several books. So Dr. King is out there in my pantheon as a way shower and a pathfinder to speak from his faith about what is required for racial harmony and racial justice. And he got in trouble before they killed him because he had started talking about poverty. And he'd started talking about the hell of Vietnam. And he'd started talking about economic disparities and where the powers were. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but it's a good time to get rid of it. And we'll name a holiday for him, and we'll build statues for him. But we won't remember what he said too often. We won't remember what he said about regard for one another. That justice is not something you own or you distribute. It's something that is born in a culture. And if it be not there, then the culture is tainted and toxic. Because if you don't have the rights that the other person has, because of color or position or money or religion, then something's wrong with this picture. And I want you to think a moment, and this is a cheap way to do this, but I really want to think about it. How would you have been as a black person? How would you have owned that experience? I can't even imagine, because I'm a little feisty anyway, I've sort of got a chip on my shoulder. I'd been killed by the time I was 13. And they did that too. And we did that too. And don't you dare look down at the South. It was done in the North just a little bit less obvious. Southerners are just crude. Northerners are sort of sophisticated in a different way. So racism has been inherent in the life of this country. We had to compromise with the South in the Constitutional Convention of the 1780s to allow not to strike out slavery. And Adams and Jefferson and the great lights knew it was a heartache that was going to come. It was a harbinger in the night, someone said, that's going to come, and a storm that's going to blow over us. I think that was Robert Morris that said that. It's not settled that we gave a 3/5 clause. Isn't that wonderful? I don't know who made that suggestion. I need to do a little bit more search. They're sitting in a committee meeting. What are we going to do about black people? The South doesn't have enough population. I mean, we got to just count. We got to count representation by population, right? No. The Southerner said with a Southern drawl. What y'all gonna do about us? Well, we'll give you blacks. We'll count them 3/5 in the total, and we'll give you congressmen 3/5 the count. So each of your slave will count as a 3/5 white man when we tally up how many representatives you get in the House of Representatives, and then you can have our money. So South Carolina was the richest colony in the 13. So complicity, injustice, chicanery, evil is our heritage. I didn't do it. I didn't make those decisions. No. It came with your birthright. You aren't accountable, but you're responsible. Our past is our past, and it should shape our future. But unless we tell the truth about it, we're just doing make-believe. We're building statues and having holidays and give us another day off. Dr. Martin Luther King literally knew that he was going to die. And somewhere in his conscience, he said it often, I'm scared. But it's a job I got to do. It's what I'm called to do. Those light showers, those people across the ages who said to humanity, you're better than you act. I think you're going to make this if you make these good decisions. Call us day in and day out to do better with what we are, what we have, what we're able to do. And we've come a long way, and I don't mean that as a cop-out. But I also see it all the time. I see the racism there. Go back home, and I see a lot of milk chocolate babies. And I'm thinking, well, maybe that's going to be it. Maybe interracial marriages and all that will smooth out the differences. But then I think, yeah, but you're losing a heritage. You've sort of diluted what's beautiful about the black experience, or the white experience, or the Irish experience. How can we not accept the fact that the rainbow has many colors, the quilt has many patches, that everybody is needed to make for the beauty and the strength of this country? Someone said, look at the British royal family. That's what happens when you inbreed. You know, that's just, good stock is always new blood and new people and different types. And that's what genetics has taught us. One of the things genetics has taught us, too, that we're all cousins. If you push it back as far as we can push it back, we're all from the same mama down in Africa. Where the daddy came from, we don't know. We don't care. Mama's the one we count on. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Michael King, offered to this country a new vision when we were in a pretty dark place. And he needs to be honored and understood as that. And you can say, well, he had his flaws, and yada, yada, yada. Truth bears all iniquities. If it's true, it's true. Not alternative facts. Not what I want to think. But segregation and injustice in the South after Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. That's ridiculous. I saw that school I went to. It was pretty shabby. But we drove by several other black schools that was the shabbiest that you've ever seen. And my grandmother taught in the white schools. She taught third grade, and she had a very shabby existence. I can't even imagine what they did over at the black schools. But in 1964, that ended in my home county. And those 30 seniors came over to graduate with me with another 120 white people. And they were wonderful people, but I thought to myself, yeah, but they lost their senior year. They came over here to be just, pioneers in this white integrated culture. What was that about? Okay, I got to quit. We'll talk a minute. Dr. Martin Luther King's a hero, not because of his personality. He was a genius for that. But what he stood for, what he died for, what he lived for. So like Jesus. Okay, bye. We're done.